Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it another minute for folks to jump on. It looks like we have a good amount, so I'm going to go and get ahead and get started. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Stephanie Scarmo, a member of the National Collaborative for Infants and Toddlers and the National Senior Director of Policy Research at Voices for Healthy Kids. Thank you so much for being here today. Today, we have three expert panelists who will share information about the Farm Bill legislation and why prenatal-to-three leaders and advocates should be engaged in its renewal. We've also asked our presenters to think about and share their why. Why do they do this work and why is it important to them? But first, a couple of housekeeping notes. First, today's call is being recorded and we will be sharing recording slides, reference tools, and resources within a week. So please watch your email inbox for those items. We do ask that you please keep yourself on mute when not speaking to help ensure good sound quality throughout the webinar. If you do need assistance during the call, please message Andrea Guarnero. She will be happy to help you. We will also have a Q&A session at the end of the call. If you have any questions, you can either enter them directly into the chat or feel free to raise your hand. We will call on you and you can come off mute to ask your questions. At the end of the session, we will share a brief survey and we ask you all to take 2 minutes to complete it. We do really take your feedback seriously and it will help us to make these types of webinars more successful in the future. Now I'm pleased to turn it over to our first speaker. Christy Anderson is the Director of Federal Government Relations at the American Heart Association, and she leads federal advocacy for nutrition, physical activity, wellness, and built environment issues. At the AHA, Christy works with federal policymakers to identify opportunities to promote cardiovascular health through measures aimed at primary prevention. Christy has more than 20 years of experience in public health in both the nonprofit sector and on Capitol Hill. Prior to working for the American Heart Association, Christy was the Senior Federal Policy Analyst with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Center to Prevent Childhood Obesity. She also spent several years as the Health Legislative Analyst at the RAND Corporation and the Office of Congressional Relations, and she began her health policy career in the Office of the United States Senator Tom Harkin. Christy received her Master's of Public Policy with a concentration in Global Medical and Health Policy at George Mason University, and a BA with a double major in Political Science and International Relations from Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. Welcome, Christy. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And it's always a little weird to hear your bio read. And at the heart of it, I'm just, a big policy nerd. So I'm going to share my screen and my PowerPoint here. Give me one moment. All right. Can I get a verbal, yes, I can see? There we go. I see it now. All right. Great. Well, I'm going to walk you through today what the Farm Bill is. It's very, very high level. My colleagues will get into more of the connection between the prenatal-to-three population and why the Farm Bill is so important. And Stephanie asked us to give us our whys, and I will actually get to my why a little bit later in this presentation. So I call it an overview of a misnomer legislation, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get into that in a moment. But what is at its base? I'm trying to forward. Things happening. Sorry, y'all. There we go. There we go. All right. What is Farm Bill? You hear a lot about it. And so it is a comprehensive multi-year bill. It's part of a regular reauthorization. There are several of those bills that go around that get reauthorized every few years or so. It's reauthorized right now every 5 years, and it does address agriculture and nutrition policy. By its name, you'd think it'd be all agriculture, but that is wrong. The current reauthorization expires September 30th of this year, and I don't think they're going to meet that deadline. And again, I keep saying this, but I'll get into that a little bit later as to why they're not going to get there. So the Farm Bill has 12 titles, and you can see them all here. It is a very large, very comprehensive bill, lots of topics. I can't even remember the last one. I think it was 1,000+ pages. So if you ever have insomnia, I recommend you read the Farm Bill before bed. It will put you to sleep. But the one title out of all these 12 I really want to focus in on is Title IV, Nutrition. In the last Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, that title, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, GUSNIP, SNAP-Ed, and a few other small anti-hunger feeding nutrition programs, that was 76% of the total bill cost. So when I say this is a misnomer legislation, it really is a nutrition and feeding bill. More of that and less of agriculture. But it's important they stay together because what we eat is shaped by this bill. So there's a little bit of a cyclical connection between all the titles. So there have been 18 farm bills since 1933. The Farm Bill really began as a response in the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and really needing our agriculture economy really needed help at that time. Title IV, the nutrition title, that wasn't actually added until 1973. So we're coming on the 50th anniversary of having a nutrition title in the Farm Bill. And we've had a nutrition title longer than we haven't had one. We recently crossed that line. So the Congressional Budget Office, this is the organization that basically analyze how much bills are going to cost. They call them outlays. In February, they did an analysis of what they think the 2023, this Farm Bill is going to cost. And you can see it's going to cost a lot of money. And this is assuming there are no changes in policy whatsoever. So it assumes no changes to save money. It assumes no changes to spend money. And you can see in the lower corner here, Title IV spending, that's expected to be 1.205 trillion. So that's the entire title, not just SNAP, but SNAP is the overwhelming majority. And you can see from this pie chart, the big red Pac-Man there, that is what Title IV is, the share of the overall bill. And you can see by another one of my little bubbles, 3 of the titles aren't even reflected in there. And quite frankly, like 4 titles, you can't even see their little slice of the wedge. But earlier this month, CBO put out another projection, and that cost is now expected to rise to $1.51 trillion. And now CBO projects that SNAP will cost $1.223 trillion over the next decade. And part of this is they are expecting every year about 1 million more people to get on SNAP. And so that is where you see the increase in cost. And this, combined with the debt ceiling debate, which I keep saying this, but we'll get into that a little later, is kind of, if I may be colloquial, really freaking people out on Capitol Hill. And then you also have that coupled with the data that shows that SNAP spending reached its highest point ever in history in 2021 and 2022. This chart only goes to shows 2021 because the data from USDA is usually a year behind, but you can see that enormous spike from the pandemic and the emergency allotments of people needing SNAP to help feed their families, to eat. And we talked about my why. So I mentioned the emergency allotment. SNAP pandemic emergency allotments ended in March. And I live in an amazing community. I live in a condo building that has more than 1,000 people that live in it. It's like its own little city, and it's awesome. We have every age, we have every ethnicity. I think last count 30 different languages are spoken in my building. I really love where I live. There's an elderly lady in her late 60s who lives here. And we try to take care of our elderly in our building. And so in February, and I talk to her a lot, sometimes I take her to the grocery store. In February, her SNAP benefits, and you can see it here, was $275. In March, when the emergency allotments ended, her SNAP benefit is now $23. That is a significant jump. And this woman, she tries so hard to eat healthy. And during the pandemic, she was able to really buy a lot of produce and fruits and vegetables, and really just had she'd tell me about the meals she'd make, and it's like, I'm coming to your place to eat. That sounds awesome. Healthy, nutritious, flavorful. Now she only has $23 on her SNAP to spend, and she's on a fixed income on Social Security. So you asked me about my why. This is part of my why I care about this so much. Some of you who are coming in next week to talk about why the Farm Bill is so important, these are the things we're going to ask Capitol Hill for. Keeping the nutrition benefits strong. And the reason why I'm bringing it up to this whole group is to lay the context of some of the debates that are happening right now along the Farm Bill. So I mentioned the debt ceiling debate. There is a proposal for work requirements for ABODs, able-bodied adults without dependents, it would really harm some of our older Americans, the work requirements proposed in the House debt ceiling bill. There's also a lot of debate around the Thrifty Food Plan update. So we want to make sure Capitol Hill really hears that, SNAP beneficiaries have already taken a hit with the emergency allotments ending. Do not hit them even more. We should not default on our debt because we want to hurt those who are most vulnerable even more. Our debt and defaulting on our debt should not be contingent on harming vulnerable people. We also, one of our asks is maximize opportunities for SNAP to improve nutrition security through pilots. We say pilots because a lot of it is just we need data collection, but this is overall something that we think could improve diet quality for everyone. We know that where SNAP goes, the rest of the retail environment goes. And then there's the nutrition incentive program, the GusNIP program. Right now, the match is 50%, which means the entity administering the incentive program has to come up with 50% of the cost of it themselves. And that really locks out a lot of communities that are under-resourced, don't have like a grant writing machine available at their fingertips. So we want to lower that to 10% to make it more equitable. As an advocate, I'd love no match. As a former SAD staffer, I'm like, yeah, you kind of have to match. So let's bring the match down as low as possible. And then our last ask is expand SNAP Online and modernize the system. We saw with SNAP Online, it was a pilot at the beginning of the pandemic, and suddenly it was like, oh, hey, let's expand it, but we don't know how to expand it yet. And thankfully, it went off mostly without a hitch. But now we need to get it into more rural areas, more food desert areas, and we need to ensure that other retailers can participate besides large national retailers, and modernize the system. I won't go into details here, but the SNAP EBT system is woefully outdated. We saw that last year with the issue of SNAP beneficiaries getting their benefits skimmed at the register, and really just being in a tough spot with no money to buy food. So what happens if the Farm Bill expires? And here's the main sort of parts of the Farm Bill. We're going to go from the bottom up, and you can see that, particularly with SNAP, the things that we care about in Title IV, no immediate changes. It's what's called mandatory funding. So that gets funded on a formulary basis every year through appropriations. We don't have to have a debate and approach how much we should give SNAP. The one area I want to draw to your attention is the very top one, price support, otherwise known as commodities. If the Farm Bill expires, the commodity federal price supports, go back to 1949 levels. And with food inflation and just cost of living different, 70 years later, or whatever, 70 or 80, whatever the math lays out, this is why they will do the Farm Bill. They will not let this slide. Particularly, we have an election coming up. So this is I'm going to share later slide. So we have a debt ceiling debate right now. And I mentioned part of debt ceiling debate is putting stricter work requirements on SNAP. That will really set the tone for where the Farm Bill goes. At the same time, we're having a huge appropriations fight. The House Ag Approps bill just came out this week. It was, if I may be very blunt, it was terrible. Really just cut some of significant programs, even cut SNAP despite the CBO, the CBO projections saying it should be increased. So I don't know how they came up with that, but cuts WIC, it cuts a lot of programs. It puts a lot of restriction on things that the federal government wants to do to improve the diet quality of the food supply. So you have that hanging out here. And if they fail to do a Farm Bill this year, they're probably going to try to authorize through appropriations. And then, of course, the Farm Bill. I mentioned it expires September 30th. This is my 5th Farm Bill. They're not going to get it done by September 30th. And that would be even without the debt ceiling debate. The debt ceiling is going to push it off. But I do think they get it done early next year, particularly because we've got a 2024 election. It's a presidential election. The entire House is up for re-election. And both parties have a vested interest in getting it done and getting it done early, because this is likely going to be the first $1 trillion farm bill, and nobody wants to vote on that close to when the polls open, so they're going to want to get it done early. In addition, in the Senate, we have Debbie Stabenow, who's retiring. She's chair, and this is her legacy bill. So we've had some hearings. We're seeing marker bills come out. Timing, it'll be really dependent on what happens with the debt ceiling. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation. Those are some of our Farm Bill papers, and look forward to taking your questions in a bit.
Thank you so much, Christy. I know there is at least one question in the chat, so we're going to hold those for the end to make sure everyone has enough time. Thank you so much, Christy. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Javier Morales. That was a great overview of the bill itself. Javier is now going to tell us why this is not just something that folks inside the Beltway and DC care about, but why the Farm Bill is so important to communities. Javier is the executive director of the Praxis Project, a national organization dedicated to supporting communities building power to improve health, equity, and racial justice. Javier is a longtime advocate for community-driven initiatives to achieve health equity and environmental justice. He currently serves on the board of the Urban Peace Initiative and was, until recently, the chair of the City of Berkeley Sugar Sweetened Beverage Tax Expert Panel. Javier, a former Peace Corps volunteer in Hungary, is originally from Sanger, California, and studied environmental sciences at the University of California, Berkeley, and city and regional planning at Cornell University. Welcome, Javier.
I'm coming on. I'm trying to click all these buttons that need to be clicked. Thank you for that, Stephanie. Thank you for the intro. And Christy, thanks for the breakdown on the Farm Bill. I think there's a lot in there, and I think oftentimes we don't realize just how big it is and how it actually funds almost like an ecosystem. And that's important for our communities. And so anyway, thank you for the invitation to share the screens this morning. As Stephanie said, my name is Javier Morales. I am the executive director for the Praxis Project, and I'm really happy to be here to share why the Praxis Project is committed to helping pass the Farm Bill. This bill is more about farms and agriculture, is more than just about farms and agriculture. As Christy mentioned, it's misnamed. It's much more. And many of the communities that Praxis works with, communities that have experienced marginalization since forever, rely on many of the supports that are included in this bill. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. But first, I wanted to talk about the why. Why I do this work and why I feel so lucky to lead Praxis today and to be able to partner with the American Heart Association in their work to help to try to improve people's lives. And I do this because of McFarland. Yes, it's the same McFarland that Kevin Costner highlighted in his 2015 film about the cross-country runners that overcame incredible odds, to exceed expectations. But Sanger, Stephanie mentioned that I grew up in Sanger, California. That's actually about 40 miles northeast of McFarland, and it's the same kind of community. My grandparents, my parents have their roots in the fields. They were farm workers. And, fortunately for me, I was headed in a different trajectory. They made it possible for me to head in a different trajectory. But in 1978, when I was in 6th grade, giving you guys my age here, I was a paper boy. I delivered the newspaper. I delivered the Fresno Bee every morning before school. And I was the worst paper boy because I would read the paper before I would actually go out and start to deliver it, which caused me to be late, not just on my deliveries, but sometimes late for school. Not good habits. But, something that really popped up for me, it was in 1978, when articles started to surface about the inordinate number of cancers that were being detected in this small agricultural town, McFarland, of 6,000 people. On one street out of the 17 homes, there were at least 5 cases of cancer. And this was a farm worker community, and the kids who were coming down with the cancers, they looked just like me and my siblings. And so again, I'm only 12 or 13 at this time, so I don't have a lot of worldly experience, but I do have a good understanding between right and wrong, and a strong sense of fairness. But again, they're 12, 13 years old. My little lizard brain, not a lot there to be able to contextualize. And the conversation I was reading in the paper just didn't make sense to me. The experts seemed to be lost on whether this was indeed a cancer cluster or if it just was poor luck and an anomaly. And lost in the debate was how to deal with this, how to bring relief to the families that were experiencing this horror. What measures needed to be in place to prevent more cases. And it just seemed to me like the conversation was backwards. It seemed that the indisputable data needed to be produced before all the resources that needed to be marshaled could be brought to bear on fixing this. And it's kind of I don't know. It's interesting to think about this now, because it's like back then when I grew up, I wanted to have the skills to be able to help communities like this, to be able to prove that things weren't just accidents, to be able to use data and scientific rigor to be able to make the case. And so, today, nearly 50 years later, undergraduate degree in environmental sciences, master's degree in local economic development, and a PhD in community development and environmental engineering, I feel like my little 12-year-old brain would be happy. It really was a driver for me. So that's the why. So I probably took too long on the why, but I'll try to go a little bit faster through the next slides. But just a quick review. Praxis, who we are, our mission is to build healthy communities by transforming the power relationships and structures that affect our lives and community. And we do it through policy advocacy and through local organizing. And we also do it through partnering with groups and collaboratives like the one like you all. And because what we know is that what we're up against is huge. We're not just up against political folks that we really need to help come onto our side to provide these basic necessities and resources for our communities, but there's a whole set of industries on the other side that are trying to keep that from happening. And so, what we're up against requires us all to come together and work together to be able to make the change happen that we feel needs to be happening. We subscribe to, when we talk about equity, and the title of my little presentation here was towards equity through the Farm Bill, towards equity. For us, it really is about everyone having a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible. And this is important. We support policy advocacy. We support policy advocacy, collaborative advocacy, centering communities' needs, centering the needs of the most vulnerable, and that's our starting point. Our North Star is basically equity and justice. And we also take an expansive view about what it means to what healthy communities means. Sorry, the type is so small on this slide, but we feel like to have a healthy community and just communities, we need to have all the ingredients in place in our environments to make this happen. Things like nutrition, clean water, parks, green space, safety. We need to feel safe, economic opportunities, and more. All of this needs to be robustly in place. And when we have all this in place, the opportunity for equity and justice is much more profound. And the Farm Bill is one of those opportunities that covers many of these ingredients for improving equity and justice in our country. It's not a perfect bill, but in this legislative process that we're all a part of, we often have to take the good over the perfect. And the good for me, I stole this slide from Christy, and with her permission, I'm sampling her. It's like, I'm doing this is my song, and I've sampled a little bit of Christy here. If you just, again, it is a misnamed bill. It's not just about farms. It's about many things. And yes, we are very interested in nutrition. We're interested in SNAP. We're also interested in WIC. I grew up on WIC. But, the other parts of this ecosystem that this bill covers is, conservation, credit, rural development, research extension and related, energy, and horticulture. This horticulture one is especially interesting to me because that's like fruits and vegetables, but I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But yeah, so these are the titles within the 12 that we're really interested in at Praxis. And so what we see is this is a real opportunity to improve equity. Robust SNAP program. I know many of you probably know this much deeper than I do, but it increases the demand for healthier foods. If SNAP says only these kinds of things will be covered, then, the markets will shift. It improves the systems and structures that are used for SNAP recipients. It's like the innovations that are happening. We need more of them to happen. Gone are the days when there was a little bit of shame. I remember when I was a kid, there was a little bit of shame walking up with the little booklet. The EBT card it's like such a game changer for like dignity for people that have to rely on these projects. And so there's continuous innovations that happen with each iteration. It helps make nutritious foods available and accessible in areas where full service grocery stores are lacking. And then the specialty crops one, I can't believe that like the specialty crops one, if you look at the other slide that Christy showed, like where all the funding was going to, so little goes towards the things that keep us healthy, the things that every food nutrition person tells us how many servings we need of, fruits, vegetables. This needs to be expanded too, but just the fact that the little bit that is being supported is very important. And it also increases capital for historically underserved farmers, provides technical assistance for historically underserved farmers, and it promotes sustainable agricultural processes that can reduce pesticide use. And again, that takes us full circle back to McFarland and other communities, farming communities, farm worker communities that have to experience the toxicity of the pesticides that are used when we're just doing straight commercial farming, no innovations. So all of these are just a few. These are just a few of the elements that really help us to come on to this and try to make sure that this good bill, again, it's far from perfect, but that this good bill will help us to get to where we need to get when we talk about health, equity, and justice. And I love these two quotes in tandem. The ones on the far left, where Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Well, Jon Stewart added to that on Fareed Zakaria's GPS show on CNN. He said, "But it doesn't bend towards justice by gravity. You have to bend it." And so I'm really proud to be part of a collaborative that is working to bend that arc towards something that we really need for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Javier. It's really helpful to remind us all that the Farm Bill has such far-reaching effects to communities. I really appreciate it. And now I'm pleased to introduce our final speaker, Jeff Capizano. Jeff is going to speak really about why the Farm Bill is so important to the Prenatal-to-Three community and to families with young children. Jeff is the president of the Policy Equity Group, an early childhood consultancy located in Washington, D.C. Prior to founding his consultancy, he was the senior policy advisor at the Administration for Children and Families within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And while he was there, he helped administer over $16 billion in early childhood programs by providing policy guidance to the Office of Head Start and the Office of Child Care. He also acted as an interdepartmental liaison to the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the White House Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative. Jeff is a nationally known early childhood advocate and a researcher, and his current work focuses on supporting the implementation of early childhood policy in a number of states, as well as promoting healthier food and nutrition education in early childhood programs. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you. I'm just going to pull up my slides real quick. So just to start by talking a little bit about my why. So I am a son of Italian immigrants. I grew up in Rhode Island in a working poor family. My dad was a laborer and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And, we were poor, but we were not food insecure. And the reason for that is we had a large garden and we raised chickens. At one point we raised a cow. Italians are pretty generous by nature. And, one of the things that, we were able to do is to share sort of our eggs and sort of the chickens that we slaughtered and the food from the garden sort of with all of our neighbors. And that's sort of where I sort of have the roots in sort of trying to support other people and making them food secure. I think I started the Policy Equity Group because, in the Obama administration, one of the things that I was able to do was to talk to stakeholders all over the country about sort of their early childhood needs. And one of the things that I was noticing as I was sort of taking these meetings is that, there are certain groups that were really good at advocacy and certain groups that sort of needed more support. I think, when you're a policymaker, and I'm sure Christy could talk about this too, you're looking like, what is your ask? What do you need from me? How can I be of help to you? What is your rationale behind your ask? Like, why are you asking for it? Sort of, how does it align with Obama administration priorities? And so, you need to have sort of all of these things ready and at hand, when you're meeting with policymakers. And so I saw the need for the early childhood community to sort of have more sort of training and support on this. So I formed the policy equity group to go out and do that. And so that is my why. And so what I've been asked to do is talk a little bit about so why the Farm Bill is so important for young children and families. So I'm going to sort of take the child development approach on this. And so, the first thing I thought of when I was asked this question was really, the way that food insecurity affects child development. And, when I was, thinking about this, there's a great quote by Jack Shonkoff, who's the executive director of the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. He always talks about sort of, in utero and in early childhood, children are preparing for an anticipated world. And so what he did is he took this entire field of epigenetics, sort of how our genes are expressed based on our environment, and sort of made it into something that was really understandable for me. And so essentially what that means is that our environments are really giving us signals on how we develop as humans. And it starts in utero and continues sort of, in early childhood. And so if we are in a situation that is highly stressful, our stress response system is going to sort of develop in a certain way. If we are in an environment of scarcity, sort of our metabolisms are going to sort of develop in a certain way. It's going to, the way that we convert food to energy will be different in a food scarce environment than one where food is plentiful. And so, just thinking about, what they call biological memories, it's sort of these physiological adaptations occur sort of as a result of our physical environment. So, chronic stress will, affect sort of a short fuse or toxic stress response in young children. I think, we're talking a lot in the early childhood world about how we have to, not suspend or expel children because it's not children's fault that they're behaving this way. It's because of their stress response and the environments that they're coming out of into the early childhood classrooms that are causing sort of them to behave in a certain way. And then when you think about sort of food security, if you have a child that's developing in a low calorie and low nutrient environment, the child is going to develop to make do with fewer nutritional resources. And so what that means is as the child grows into adulthood and then has access to sufficient calories, but is prepared for this world of scarcity, they're going to be predisposed to a host of different problems in adulthood: diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, and things of that nature. And so, if for those of you who are coming to DC that want to sort of really think more about the relationship between, early childhood development, food insecurity, and sort of later development, I put the paper from the Harvard Center for Developing Child in the slide. The Foundations of Lifelong Health are built in early childhood. I highly recommend that you read it. And I think, why this is such a big sort of part of the policy discussion is that, these individual sort of health issues, affect society. They affect us all. They affect our health insurance costs. They reduce productivity in the workforce. They strain our health system. And so we really need to be focused on, these upstream, social determinants of health, like food insecurity in young children, in order to sort of help with these sort of bigger problems that we have as a society. And so this is why we really need to be thinking as a society about food insecurity, particularly in the prenatal to age 3 range. And so I'm hoping we can all work together to sort of make sure that everybody understands that point on Capitol Hill. And then, thinking about sort of the influence of, food insecurity on child development and sort of, future outcomes, it's important to understand how much young children are actually benefiting from SNAP. And so, SNAP is, serving about 40 million people nationally. And it's important to know that 42% of those kids that are receiving, 40% of those SNAP beneficiaries are children. And they're receiving not a lot a month, but they are, it is helping with their food security. And I think, just thinking about it as a share of the entire US population, sort of the pie charts at the bottom, What's really interesting is that, 23% of all children birth to 4 are benefiting from SNAP. And that's not, that is the entire population in the United States of children birth to 4. So that's something that, should be of note. And I think, thinking about, the different age groups in childhood, those children sort of that the collaborative is most interested in supporting has the highest percentage of children that are supported. And so, just thinking about the ways in which SNAP sort of impacts child outcomes, I think, obviously the obvious one is that, it decreases food insecurity by about 30%. There's a great paper that was written by some former colleagues at the Urban Institute that talks about the ways in which SNAP is helping to decrease food insecurity, and it's incredibly effective in that way, particularly for children. And then, not surprisingly, given sort of what we just talked about, in terms of the relationship between sort of, early childhood development and later health outcomes, that the children who are receiving SNAP benefits do in fact have better health outcomes than non-SNAP participants. And I think the other big piece of this is that, there are, by receiving SNAP benefits, families don't have to experience like the trade-offs between food and healthcare expenses. And so, families are less likely to sacrifice healthcare for food expenses when they are receiving SNAP. And I think that's a really important part. So there's sort of spillover effects related to sort of other health interventions. And then, given sort of my background, sort of, growing up with a large garden and sort of really having those experiences help me understand sort of where food comes from and sort of the health benefits of fruits and vegetables. The other piece of that's really important is that the Farm Bill is also funding nutrition education. It's called SNAP Ed. And I think, we're talking a lot about sort of how this bill is so huge and funds so many different things, but I wanted to highlight, SNAP Ed as a really important part of the Farm Bill. And, thinking about sort of our work in early childhood, what we know is that early childhood is the foundation for everything, right? It's the foundation for future cognitive outcomes, physical outcomes, health outcomes. It's also the foundation for both taste preferences and eating and healthy behaviors. And so when you think about SNAP, you have all of this money that's going to support food security through the SNAP benefits. But you also have the SNAP Ed program, which is helping people understand how to use those benefits to eat healthier. And so it funds nutrition education, social marketing, policies and systems change. I'm on a board of a organization called the Hand, Heart, and Soul Project out of Clayton County, Georgia. And we just approved this week at our board meeting our application for SNAP. And so we're going to be using that for nutrition education and supporting sort of kids in different early childhood programs to learn sort of how best to eat healthy and to develop taste preferences that are for healthy foods. And so when you think about sort of the outcomes of SNAP Ed, you've got 40% of the participants in SNAP Ed programs saying that they're eating more fruits and vegetables, they're drinking fewer sugar-sweetened beverages, and they're moving more, they're sitting less. And so this is a really important aspect of the Farm Bill that we need to be talking about as well. And when I was in the Obama administration, the way that Obama talked about the Farm Bill was like, it was like a Swiss Army knife. It's like, you need a bottle of wine opened, you've got like a can opener or a bottle opener there. You need something cut, you've got scissors. And so it really is this a bill that's all about supporting sort of all of these different things. And one of the marker bills that is going to be introduced in the next few weeks is a bill that is going to be supporting childcare in rural America. And I think, we haven't seen all the details of the bill yet, but this is something that we're watching and that I wanted to make you aware of. Because I think, as we think about sort of our work in early childhood and, sort of the problems that we're facing sort of nationally around infant and toddler care, lack of capacity, lack of quality, it's too expensive, all of those different things are exacerbated, in rural communities, they're even worse. And so there's this great survey that went out, it was the University of Ohio and the National Children's Center for Rural Agriculture. They they did a survey of childcare in rural communities, and found that 40% of farm families report access to affordable childcare as an important issue to their business and the economic viability of their business. 74% are experiencing childcare challenges, often around cost, availability, the distance to the centers and the quality of that care. I mean, this sounds very familiar to those of us who are working in the space. And then 86% of the of the respondents are actually bringing their children to the farm and working with the children on the farm. Hence the picture on the left, I think, is pretty iconic around that finding. And then there are opportunities costs related to childcare costs. Those who are on the smaller farms say that the childcare costs are limiting their abilities to invest more sort of in the farm. And so, we want to be thinking about sort of, childcare, it's a significant, agricultural policy issue. And so we're interested in following this sort of bill as it moves forward. And essentially, it's a bipartisan bill. It's going to be introduced by a Democrat and a Republican senator. And it's really about trying to use currently existing ag programs, particularly around in the rural development area, to develop, expand, and improve childcare in rural areas. And so one of the things that it does is there's a set of programs within the legislation where they want to carve out a 10% set aside, and the programs are specific to developing facilities, training and technical assistance, and loan programs, and these can be used to build childcare capacity. And then there's another section of the legislation that talks about other programs where childcare would be sort of a competitive priority when you're applying. And so just wanted to flag those for you. We will definitely keep you sort of in the loop on those. And I think, as we move forward, we want to continue to create this awareness of the importance of the Farm Bill, particularly SNAP, for child development, and accessing that paper is going to be from the Harvard Center of Developing Child is going to be really important for that, and you can have that as a resource. And then we want to educate ourselves in the ways in which SNAP can be improved and benefits can be increased. I always look to FRAC, when I'm looking for asks. I know that Christy put forth a number of asks as well for the Farm Bill. And then we'll also, we need to follow the progress of this rural childcare initiative. And so looking forward to talking more about this and to your questions. And we'll talk to you in a minute. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you for helping us to better understand why the Farm Bill is also so important to families with young children prenatally through 3. So now we do have a few moments for some additional questions. I know there's been a bit of chatter in the chat. And at this point, you can either put additional questions into the chat or you can come off mute and raise your hand, and all panelists are here and ready to answer. I see that there's one question. Luz, I'm not sure if there's anything more that you want to share or ask about your question, Christy. I know you have responded quickly in the chat as well. Okay, we do have another one that just came in. Can you speak more on how the Farm Bill impacts WIC, please? Any of you are welcome to speak to that.
I'll go ahead and dive into that. So the Farm Bill really doesn't affect WIC. WIC is authorized through child nutrition reauthorization, which last time was reauthorized was 13 years ago, and we really tried to get it done last year. Unfortunately, Congress did not do its job. With WIC, I'm more concerned about what's happening in appropriations, because WIC funding is discretionary funding. So, they can kind of pick and choose. Well, WIC itself is mandatory. The other things like the cash value voucher, breastfeeding support are all discretionary. So it's appropriations I'm really worried about. The committees are very very good, if you will, about not taking other programs in their jurisdiction that aren't part of the reauthorization and then trying to do it in a different reauthorization. So hope that helps.
Thanks, Christy. We have a hand raised. LaTanya.
Hello, everyone. I just have a question. There used to be, I want to say called a program where when you use your bridge card, you would get like, say if you spent $10 on fruits and vegetables, you would get like a receipt for $10 to use again at the store. And they stopped it all of a sudden. I want to say like in August. Did that have anything to do with the Farm Bill? Just wondering, since it was only for fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know specifically about the program you were mentioning because there are sort of a couple veins of incentive programs, and we call that an incentive program. There is the federal incentive program, which is GusNIP. And then there are a lot of state-funded incentive programs, and my colleagues at Voices and American Heart Association, they work tirelessly on that. So I suspect it was the grant ended wherever it came from, that it was a grant rather than just state funding because it ended, and that there wasn't any money to renew. So I'm thinking that's what that was. Without digging in further, don't like quote me on that to the New York Times or Washington Post. But one of the things we are trying to get to with GusNIP, the federal incentive program, is to make it a nationwide program. We were able in the last Farm Bill to get increased funding and make it mandatory funding. And that mandatory funding is important because that means appropriators can't take it away at a whim. But one of the things to be able to expand it nationally is to modernize the EBT program. Because right now it's like a hodgepodge of how incentive programs are implemented and accepted, and none of them through the EBT card. So we really need to get that EBT integration in order to keep expanding incentives.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. There's another question in the chat. This is for either you, Javier, or Jeff. We're hearing a lot about this in the news, but I'm wondering if one of you can speak more about the Farm Bill's impact on work requirements for able-bodied adults with no dependents.
I'm happy to take it, but I don't want to hog all the questions. I'll see if Jeff or Javier want to take it.
I think for me, it's just the side that this just doesn't make sense when it comes to certain populations. That's a really broad brush they're painting with, and it's going to hurt people. It's going to hurt some people, and I feel like I don't have like the exact detail on that because we're not the policy shop. But I'd love to hear from Jeff or Christy like a little bit more on that detail.
Yeah, I mean, I think Christy hit on it sort of the best initially, where this is kind of caught up in the debt ceiling debate initially. Right. And so, the negotiations right now are around sort of increasing the age of the mandatory work requirement, I think from something like 59 to 65, and just, it's interesting because it's like the White House is now signaling that they might actually, cave on some of these things. So it's something that we need to be watching really closely and actually sort of having conversations with the White House and other members about, because I think, as we think about sort of the way that this debt ceiling sort of debate is going to play out, it's like, where do the Republicans get to save face around sort of the work that they're doing, and sort of where do these negotiations land? And, typically, it's those who are most impoverished that end up sort of feeling the brunt of the negotiation. And so I don't know, Christy, if that's a fair assessment, but
yeah, Jeff, I think. Sorry. I think that's a really fair assessment. At baseline, it's a laudable goal to ensure that everyone who wants to work can work, has a job available, has a living wage. I think that's what gets lost in this debate, is so many of the people on SNAP are either children, elderly, the disabled, or are underemployed. They're working, but they're just not making enough money to, live like a baseline life. I think that gets lost in the debate. Jeff was absolutely right. What happens in the debt ceiling will affect the Farm Bill. If nothing happens as far as work requirements and SNAP, we're going to see that debate in the Farm Bill. And it's really unfortunate, very disappointing to hear the intel coming from the White House that there might be a deal on work requirements. Being able to work shouldn't, let me rephrase that. Getting benefits so you can feed your family, so you can eat to live, shouldn't be contingent on whether you have a job or not. The other thing that concerns me that's in the debt ceiling debate is taking away some of the state's autonomy for waivers, which really helps the states to react to economic realities, to job availability realities. And that one, I hate the ABOD language in the debt ceiling, but taking away the state's autonomy is the one that probably scares me more.
Thank you all. Jeff, this might be a question for you as you touched on SNAP-Ed a little bit, but Sarah had a follow-up question in the chat. What efforts are made to generate self-reliance and access to education around gardening, community gardening shares, or economic mobility to be self-sufficient so that families aren't reduced to dependency on the government?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that sort of in my personal experience with Hand Hard Soul is that, you know, the SNAP-Ed program is going to support sort of gardening educators so that we will, you know, be able to fund individuals to support families in growing their own food and having their own garden. So there is an opportunity in SNAP-Ed to sort of use that funding for that. And in terms of, you know, economic mobility, I think, you know, there's opportunities, you know, to the extent that, you know, someone would want to go into farming and sort of grow and sell their own food. That's an opportunity with the SNAP-Ed funding as well. And we are going to do a little bit of work with that as well. We have a little Lions farm stand that where, you know, people can bring their food to sell. And so, you know, there are opportunities in SNAP-Ed for that.
Thank you, Jeff. We have a few more minutes for any last questions.
Sorry, having a little bit of a coughing fit. It's lovely. I have long COVID. It's great.
Oh, man.
It's fantastic. But in the chat, there was a comment about most states are behind on processing paperwork and teach them trade. So yeah, states are behind. I mean, they are just the states are charged with the processing. You know, there was overwhelming demand during the pandemic and the demand's still there. They just don't have enough resources and enough people. That's something that hopefully we can continue to address in the Farm Bill, is giving them the resources. And then the teach them trades, I'm going to post a link in the chat here. So in the 2014 Farm Bill, there's actually a pilot, an ENT pilot that looked at you know, job training with the SNAP benefits. And basically what the data show is that, you know, long and short of it is that SNAP benefits should not be contingent on working, because like the cost of the pilot outweighed the cost of the benefit. The increased employment didn't increase earnings. It didn't decrease SNAP participation or improve food security. So it's really interesting. The data is really interesting, and the pilots were really interesting. So I think we're all kind of, no pun intended, even though I love food puns, we're still digesting that going into this Farm Bill debate.
Thank you. Marian, I wanted to give you a chance to come off mute. I see that you have a comment. Or wanted to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. I provide technical assistance and training for childcare programs in the Southwest region of Georgia. And it's not like a question, but I want it to be everyone to be aware. There are some childcare programs that we do have areas in this childcare programs, and it's a rural area. One program called Better Groceries, they created a mobile grocery store for childcare programs, and also the underserved population, and they literally drive around to childcare programs in rural areas to provide healthier eating options for all. And so on that, but they recreated a bus, renovated a bus, and they literally drive around, you know, serving those that cannot get to grocery stores or are not able to buy healthier foods in their area. And they also give them the education on it. So those are some of the things that in this area, they're the only ones that I think that have done that. And this is a husband and wife, but they own a child care program as well. So that is how, I just want to give like a little snap on what we are facing in Southwest Georgia.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So when I think about sort of, you know, childcare as in sort of an upstream social determinant of health and all the calories that are consumed by children in childcare programs, it's kind of really important to figure out ways to bring healthier foods to these programs. And so I appreciate the notion of sort of a bus and food deserts trying to do that. I think. And, you know, when we start to talk about sort of, you know, the child nutrition reauthorization, we get into the child and adult food care program and sort of changes that we need to make to that. We'll hopefully be able to talk more about sort of that connection to childcare centers.
Thank you all. I'm just being mindful of time. I know there's so much great conversation going on in the chat, but I do want to give our presenters an opportunity to thank them for presenting today. Christy, Javier, and Jeff, we really appreciate you taking the time today to explain the Farm Bill. Before we end the webinar, I would like to encourage everyone to please open the link that we're going to put in the chat for a survey. As I said before, we really do value and use your feedback to help shape our future trainings. So please open the link and take our brief survey. And we will be following up with this webinar with the recording and all of the presenters' contact information for additional questions that we didn't get to today. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I really appreciate the time from our presenters. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and happy Friday. Thank you.
Thanks all.